the U.S.-China relationship where, Connor, we have the Olympic Games coming up, and I come to the, anti-war foreign policy angle probably a little bit like you do, guessing from that picture over your shoulder there. From Ron Paul, who always talked about, let's play baseball, let's play sports. That's the way it should work. I remember Rocky IV, he goes to Russia and gets the
If
Russians
you can
chanting for
change,
the
we
not
can
Russia
change.
for the Soviet Union, and they all fall in love with him. And so yeah, the Americans and everybody, we go to China and we kick ass, and then the Chinese are like, screw this communism, we want capitalism, right? That's the way it's supposed to work. I'm joking a little bit, but at the same time, it is an opportunity for diplomacy. We saw this with like the 2017 games in Korea, where they came in under one banner, and if it wasn't for Trump really screwing that up, that could have been a real moment where we could have had a more peaceful situation on the Korean Peninsula. And so again, these Olympic Games should present an opportunity for some kind of diplomacy to break out, but the Americans are making sure that doesn't happen, and the Biden administration has gone ahead and said they will have a diplomatic boycott of the Olympic Games. Now, I don't know if the U.S. has diplomatically boycotted Olympic Games in the past. What this actually means is that no U.S. officials will be in China on official business. I don't know, like, if this means, like, if Marjorie Taylor Greene really wants to stick it in the eye of Biden, like, I think she could still go to China. I don't think, Biden could do anything to stop her, but it wouldn't be like an official government business or anything like that. And so the U.S. says that the reason they're doing this is because of the human rights violations going on in China, and of course they cite threatening Taiwan and Hong Kong, but the main portion of it is the alleged genocide against the Uighur minority Muslim population, which we recently went through and debunked on this show, so I'm not going to do it here again today. But if you're interested, be sure you're listening to the show, because I can't go through and do all these myths every single time, but they largely manipulate data and rely on the work of this kook Adrian Zenz in order to fabricate a genocide allegations against the Chinese government, when really they're just talking about a decline in birth rates, and there's other explanations for that. Now, with the Americans boycotting, the Australians have already jumped on board and will also be diplomatically boycotting the Beijing Winter Olympics. And so we're probably going to see a few more countries jump on board before we get to the end of this. Of course, China is upset, and they said that they will take retaliatory countermeasures, but didn't lay out what those were. Now, I do want to clarify that the U.S. said that they're still going to support the athletes going towards China. And so, Connor, to me, this really reeks of just like a pure political move, where the U.S., rather than taking, the probably harder approach as far as U.S. politics goes, which would be to go to China and try to get some diplomacy done with like an official delegation or something like that, they're making sure the Americans still have their bread and circuses. We'll still get to see our athletes go and perform and all that. And so, you would think that like having some guy like, do the curling would be kind of trivial if there's a genocide going on. But, the U.S. athletes worked really, really hard, and so we got to make sure we still support them going to China.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of it is to, like, walk the line where it's the politically most advantageous, where, you get to sound like you're taking a real hardline approach with this diplomatic boycott, but at the same time, nobody has to, like, really lose anything as far as entertainment value goes. I mean, the world loses a potential for diplomacy, but that's it.
Yeah, I saw Jen Psaki say, but we'll be cheering our athletes on from home. And like, it's like, it's just embarrassing. Yeah, they're committing a genocide, but like, good luck, everybody. We hope we win. Like, so yeah, it's purely political and just, very predictable, unfortunately.
And then I do want to mention New Zealand also said that they were not sending any officials to the Chinese Olympic Games, but said that that was because of COVID. And because it is New Zealand, I tend to believe that could be the case. They've taken pretty strict COVID measures, and it seems within the realm of possibility that they would do that for that reason. We want to talk about hypersonic missiles, where we have everybody in the U.S. government warning that the U.S. is in an arms race and losing to China because of hypersonic missiles. This is Air Force Secretary Frank Kendall recently saying that China and the U.S. were in an arms race with again, hypersonic missiles, but not necessarily for increased numbers of those missiles, but increased quality. This is, of course, the case. You know, these things are going to carry nuclear warheads. You don't need a million of them, but you do need them to be able to function. And so that's kind of what's going on there. It's really not a surprise. Now, another thing happening, Connor, is we have the Reagan National Defense Forum, which I think CNN has a big role in. They're hosting panels and stuff like that. And of course, you know, we have a non-biased mainstream media here. And so when they put together a panel, it's, you know, General David Thompson, who's the second in command in the Space Force. And then it is the chairman, a CEO of a defense contractor, and a congressman who's the head of the Armed Services Committee. So there's no dissent in here whatsoever. They don't have somebody from the Quincy Institute or William Hartung or even from like a Defense Priorities PAC or anything like that. This is simply a Warhawk summit, and they certainly took the opportunity to do that. General David Thompson, who I talked about on the show last week, hawking it up on China, is going at it again, saying the fact is that in essence, on average, they're building and fielding, updating their space capabilities at twice the rate we are, means that very soon, if we don't accelerate our development and delivery capabilities, they will exceed us. And so, you know, this is one of those things, Connor, where the military always goes, oh my God, Russia and China are catching up to this. We have to do so much more. We need so much more funding and everything. We need to build all these new weapons. When, you know, the way I look at it, if the U.S. military is outspending the rest of the world, not the rest of the world, but certainly any of our enemies in the world combined, and then, you know, particularly Russia, we're outspending them by 3 times, Russia by 10 times, and then we're losing to them in these technical capabilities. I mean, that sounds like David Thompson should submit his resignation letter, right? Like, how are you this much of a screw up and a loser that you have 3 times the amount of money than the other opposing military, and they're commies. They're stupid, ridiculous commies, and you're losing to them? Are you serious? What is wrong with you? And you know, that is not all the take. It's, oh my God, look at our general saying they need more money, and we just got to shovel it at them. Biden also gave a speech at this Reagan Forum, and this was one of the bigger speeches that he has given since the withdrawal from Afghanistan. And in this speech, he declared America is a Pacific power, which in, you know, one sense has been true since World War II, when the U.S. went through. And I mean, I guess you could even go back to what the Spanish War, when we claimed the Philippines. But you know, we have the, you know, Marshall Islands, Guam, Okinawa, and all these other bases and everything all over the Pacific Ocean. So this is kind of true, but it also in the same time seems like an official declaration from the United States that yes, the Pacific Ocean, at least up to the first island chain, which is only a couple hundred miles off of China's border, is an American lake, and we are going to treat it as such. So I thought that was, you know, the big takeaway from his speech. He said a lot of like mumbo jumbo about, like literally about, the hypersonic weapons, like saying that China is going to have increased capability to increase their capability to have more capable hypersonic weapons, is about the quality of what he was saying on that issue. And I'm not even exaggerating that much with that statement. So
yeah, no, I've got the quote. I think he said, I would just point out the hypersonic capability is a capability, but certainly not the only capability that the PRC has the capability to develop, in my job is to focus on the broader picture and make sure we can defend ourselves against any and all threats.
Right. And then just the last thing he mentioned in this speech that I think is worth talking about, and that is saying that the policy and strategy now for dealing with China is called integrated deterrence, which relies both on strengthening work with allies and partners in the region and pushing U.S. technology industry to keep ahead of Chinese innovations. And the reason I thought this was very interesting is the Department of Defense just published a article on their website that was basically calling for the DoD to be more involved with private companies developing tech. And they say the problem is that the private sector gets the tech first. So, that this company develops something for the 330 million people in the United States and the 9 billion people on the planet. But the Pentagon says what we really want is for these tech companies to develop products for the Pentagon first. And so this could really curtail the quality of U.S. made tech products if this happens. And, with the major Chinese Competition Act that they're trying to pass in the Senate, that's a $250 billion bill. I think this is a big part of the Biden strategy, is to try to get in with the private sector and, to work with them to build technology against Russia. We also had at that conference, Representative Cooper saying that the military can't keep up with the private industry in space, and was lamenting the advances made by SpaceX and whatever Jeff Bezos' company is, Blue Origin or something. And yeah, I mean, again, this should be an indictment of the failures of the military, but rather, it's just an excuse to shovel more money at them. Connor, I want to move on and talk about some threat inflation dealing with China. We have the claims from the U.S. military, or intelligence, and report by, I believe, the Wall Street Journal first, that China is seeking its first military base on Africa's Atlantic coast. Now, as there's a great article coming out today, Wednesday at antiwar.com by Daniel Larison, where he points out that they say that this is going to be the Atlantic Ocean opposite the U.S. East Coast. And if anybody has ever looked at a map of where the U.S. is on the globe compared to where Africa is on the globe, for the most part, Africa is in the southern hemisphere and the U.S. is very much in the northern hemisphere. And so, no, Equatorial Guinea is not opposite Washington, D.C. And also, if they did happen to have one simple naval base in, Equatorial Guinea, that would not give China some kind of ability to target the United States in any unique kind of way. And so there's really no threat here, but the United States, and particularly our mainstream media, are making a very big deal out of this. And again, look forward to that article by Daniel Larison at antiwar.com, breaking down just how much of a joke this is. There's this interesting article from Axios here. Huawei sanctions snarled chip supply chains, and a big conversation in the United States right now, especially for anyone trying to buy a car, is that there's no computer chips around and that there's a big shortage of them. And what this article lays out is that when the United States put sanctions on Huawei, it produced which is a major Chinese tech company, it produced a major reaction from them that had twofold effect. Firstly, Huawei sucked in most of the components supplied to help its smartphone business survive for the next 12 months. And so when Huawei was sanctioned, they bought up all the chips that they could and all the manufacturing. You know what I mean? They needed to make sure that they weren't cut off from the global supply chain. And so they made sure they had as much of the raw material as possible. And that in turn pushed other mobile competitors to do the same thing, which left companies that don't use computer chips quite so heavily, like the automotive industry, now in a lurch. And it's very interesting how all this happens, Connor, where the U.S. thinks we're punishing China, but now really who's being punished more, the Chinese or the Americans trying to buy cars?
Yeah, all these policies are totally counterproductive and always hurt the Americans. There was that reporting, I think Mike Swanson was talking about in a recent piece he had on China, where they kind of let the cat out of the bag in a New York Times piece where they're going, look, a lot of these big bills that Biden is pushing, like the infrastructure bill, a lot of it is framed in this way of like, well, we've got to do this to compete with China. And you're seeing these like $1 trillion bills, and they're saying that this is in many ways they haven't been able to pass things like this, these mass scale industrial policy kind of bills in the modern era without previously. But now when they use China as the big boogeyman, everybody's so eager to prove their bona fides that they're as anti-China as the next guy that it gains support. And like you said, of course, if you look at even the tariffs, Trump's tariffs, it cost hundreds of thousands of jobs to Americans. So these policies, and then of course we're spending more in the military than we ever have before. So all this stuff about competing with China, it makes us, as you were mentioning Ron Paul earlier, would point out the first point I was make us much less competitive, and it only ends up hurting us much more.
All right, Connor, so maybe the most provocative thing that the U.S. has done towards China in the past week is a U.S. official traveled to Australia and said the AUKUS alliance could welcome more countries into its partnership. The reason that this is so concerning, Connor, is that the AUKUS alliance shares nuclear technology and nuclear power submarines between the U.S., UK, and Australia, as well as increasing other ties. But the nuclear submarines and the technology that comes along with that are seen as particularly provocative by not just China, but also North Korea and other countries in the region. And they're talking about expanding that to more countries. I can't imagine that they could actually be talking about like giving the Philippines this kind of technology. And so I'm guessing we're talking about JAWCUS a thing here and adding Japan to it, but maybe they could be talking about more European nations or something like that. But this is, I'm sure, definitely raised some pretty major red flags for China. We also had in November a record number of U.S. Flights in the South China Sea. They say there were 94 of them in the month of November. And just to understand how much of an uptick that is, previously, and I believe me and Connor have actually talked about this on the show in the past, that in February, the U.S. carried out a record number of flights. But this was a 25% increase over that February number. And so it's not like the previous record was 90 and we're now talking about 94. We're talking about a significant increase in flights. A lot of these flights were carried out by the Poseidon, P-8 Poseidons. These are anti-submarine drones, I think, that fly around and attempt to detect, where the Chinese drones and all that are submarines, are. So, very interesting that all this is coming out, and I'm sure China sees it as very provocative. We also had China last week carry out 27 planes flew into Taiwan's air defense identification zone. This week we have 4 Chinese planes make that flight. Notably different this time was the route that those planes took. Typically, they're flying just through not just through, but, significantly through the southern part of Taiwan's ADIZ. This time it was a very brief incursion where they, flew through the corner, but they didn't also fly towards the, eastern portion of the ADIZ as well. They stayed well to the southwest of the Taiwanese island. And so I'm not sure, maybe China wasn't trying to provoke so much with these flights, and I'm not exactly sure what they're reacting to, but it's probably the massive number of U.S. Flights in the South China Sea. Now, the U.S., we're just carrying out these 94 flights in the South China Sea, Connor, because that's what we do to enforce the global international order. But China, when they're carrying out these flights through Taiwan's ADIZ, which, as we've talked about and broken down on the show in the past, is not in any way airspace. It's very far away from the Taiwanese island. But Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin is claiming this could be a potential rehearsal for an attack on Taiwan, which at least if you look at like what kind of flights we're talking about and everything, doesn't really seem to be the case. Now they could be doing things like testing Taiwan's defenses and seeing how long it takes for Taiwan to respond and how they react when they do start maneuvers or something like that. But to say that this is a rehearsal and not also look at it in context the amount of U.S. flights that are going on is absurd and really doesn't put this into context. The last thing on China generally is more about Japan here, as the U.S. and Japan are talking about how much the Japanese will pay for the U.S. soldiers that are deployed to Japan. The U.S. is looking for Japan to pay more. Japan has agreed to this, but has not agreed to how much more they will pay. And so, Connor, it does seem like this is going to go a little bit more smoothly than it went in Korea under the Trump administration, when it was a complete disaster for several months and they were laying off Korean employees and everything like that. Connor, anything I missed on China that you wanted to mention or anything you got to comment on?
I think you covered just about all the. Oh, we know that Austin just met with the defense minister of South Korea, and they put forward that statement about for the first time. I think it. I'll have to double check, but I think it's in decades and decades, like since the '60s, probably, that where they issued a joint statement about Taiwan, saying that they're committed to peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, building off of some similar statements that were made. Between Biden and Moon Jae-in in May.
Yeah, and
so that's another major provocation.
This is a part of the U.S. reworking on their defense plans with South Korea, and they're now going to include defense of Taiwan as well.